It had been nearly a decade since I'd last walked through the creaking gates of the family home. The house hadn't changed much. Its weathered facade stood as a monument to resilience, with vines creeping up its sides and paint peeling in quiet protest. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a fragrance that hadn't left my memory no matter how far I had traveled or how much I'd tried to bury my past. I stopped a few feet from the threshold, clutching the handle of my suitcase. My heart pounded in a chaotic rhythm, almost as if it were trying to leap from my chest and escape what lay beyond that door. This wasn't just about coming home. It was about stepping into a space I had once fled from, knowing I could never return as the person they had expected me to be. Now I was here, not as Thomas, their son, but as Evelyn, the woman I had fought so hard to become. The weight of that decision pressed down on me as heavily as the afternoon heat. A lump formed in my throat as I thought about the man waiting inside. My father, once larger than life, was now a shadow of himself, weakened by the cancer that was slowly consuming him. I'd learned of his illness only a few weeks ago when my sister Sarah had called. Her voice had been thick with sorrow, yet her words had been measured. "You need to come home, Evelyn," she had said, the name rolling off her tongue without hesitation or judgment. "Dad doesn't have much time." I had missed the subtle emphasis she placed on my chosen name, a quiet reassurance that she had accepted me, even if I wasn't sure if Dad ever would. Standing here now, I felt the weight of that uncertainty pressing down on me. I took a deep breath, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and walked toward the door. The house smelled the same, wood polish, faint lavender, and the ever-present aroma of coffee, though it had likely gone cold hours ago. The faint murmur of a TV echoed from the living room, and I followed the sound, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Sarah was the first to see me. She rose from the couch, her face lighting up with a mixture of relief and sadness. "Evelyn," she said, crossing the room to embrace me. Her arms wrapped around me tightly, and for a moment, the tension in my chest eased. "You came," she whispered, pulling back to look at me. Her eyes flicked over my face, taking in the light makeup, the soft curls of my hair, and the floral blouse I'd chosen carefully for this moment. "I couldn't stay away," I replied, though the words felt heavy. She nodded, her lips curving into a bittersweet smile. "He's in his room. He's weaker than when I last called you. Just be prepared, okay?" I swallowed hard and nodded. Sarah led me down the hall, past family photos that seemed to glare at me with judgment. There was Dad, young and strong, holding a fish the size of his arm. Mom, her smile bright and unyielding, gone far too soon. And then there were Sarah and me, the two kids who'd grown up in this house. In the photos, I was still Thomas, a boy with an awkward smile and ill-fitting hand-me-downs. I reached Dad's door, hesitating for just a moment before pushing it open. The room was dim, the curtains drawn to keep out the harsh afternoon light. Dad lay in the bed, a pale figure against the dark oak frame. His once broad shoulders now seemed impossibly frail, his skin paper-thin and stretched over protruding bones. He turned his head slowly at the sound of the door, his eyes narrowing as they landed on me. For a moment, I saw confusion flicker across his face, and my stomach clenched. "Dad," I said softly, stepping closer. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by something harder to define, a mix of shock, disbelief, and perhaps even anger. "Thomas?" His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I felt the name like a slap, but I steadied myself.
"No, Dad."
"It's Evelyn now." His brow furrowed, and he tried to push himself up on the pillows, but the effort left him winded. What is this?" he rasped. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling as I reached for his. "I'm your daughter, Dad. I've always been your daughter. I just couldn't tell you before." His hand twitched beneath mine, and for a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes searched my face, as though trying to find remnants of the son he once knew. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice cracking. I took a deep breath, the words spilling out in a rush. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of what you'd say. of how you'd look at me.
I didn't want to lose you, Dad.
But I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't. It was killing me. Tears blurred my vision, and I looked away, ashamed of my own vulnerability. I didn't want to hurt you. I continued, my voice breaking. But I needed to be me. I needed to live. The silence that followed was unbearable. I dared to glance at him, expecting to see rejection etched into his features. But what I found instead was something softer. Confusion, yes, but also pain and a flicker of understanding. I don't know how to make sense of this, he admitted, his voice trembling. You're not the boy I raised. No, I agreed, squeezing his hand gently. But I'm still your child. I'm still me, Dad. Just happier. Freer. His eyes welled with tears, and he turned his head away. I thought I had lost him in that moment, that I'd come too late, that he'd never accept the truth of who I was. But then he spoke, his voice barely audible. You should have told me sooner. The words were a mix of regret and reproach, and they pierced my heart. I know, I whispered. I was scared. He turned back to me, his eyes meeting mine. I don't understand this, Evelyn. But I'm trying. For you, the sound of my name, my real name. On his lips broke something open inside me. Thank you, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. The days that followed were a blur of quiet conversations, shared memories, and tentative steps toward understanding. Dad's strength waned with each passing day, but in those final moments, something shifted between us. He asked questions, gentle, curious questions about my life, my struggles, and the journey that had brought me back to him. And I answered, holding nothing back, sharing the pain and joy of becoming Evelyn. Sarah, ever the mediator, filled in the silences, weaving threads of humor and nostalgia into our conversations. By the time the end came, Dad's face was calm, his hand warm in mine. I'm proud of you, he whispered in his final moments, his voice barely audible but carrying a weight that would stay with me forever. When the funeral was over and the house was quiet once more, I stood by his grave, the wind tugging at my dress. I felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that I had said goodbye not as the son he had once known, but as the daughter he had finally come to accept. And in that moment, I knew I had truly come home. Leaving the cemetery, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. The world seemed simultaneously heavier and lighter, as if a door had closed behind me, but another had opened ahead. It was odd. Standing there in that quiet, windswept place, I felt more like myself than I ever had in my father's house. The difference wasn't the house, though. It was him. For so long, I had feared that being myself would mean losing him, but instead, in those final days, I had found a part of him I thought was lost. Sarah walked beside me as we made our way to her car, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound between us. She hadn't said much during the funeral, but I could tell she was watching me, waiting for the right moment to speak. Once we slid into the car, she turned to me, her expression soft but questioning. How are you holding up? I exhaled slowly, pressing my hands against my lap to stop them from trembling. I don't know, I admitted. It feels unreal. Like I've been bracing for this for so long that I don't know what to do now that it's over. Sarah nodded, her gaze thoughtful. You were brave, Evelyn. Coming back, facing Dad as yourself. I don't think I could have done it. Her words caught me off guard, and I turned to her, startled. You? Sarah, you've always been the strong one. You were the one who held everything together when Mom died. She smiled faintly, but there was a sadness in her eyes. Being strong doesn't mean being brave. You left everything behind to become who you were meant to be. I've always admired you for that. Her words struck a chord deep inside me, one I hadn't realized was still raw. I had spent so many years thinking of myself as running away, as weak for leaving behind the family and life I had known. Hearing her say that she admired me felt like a balm on an old wound I hadn't known was still open. I didn't feel brave, I confessed. Most days, I felt terrified. Terrified of losing you, Dad, everything. But I couldn't keep living like that. I didn't have a choice. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you came back," she said simply. And I think Dad was too, even if he didn't know how to say it. The rest of the drive passed in companionable silence. I watched the countryside roll by, the familiar landscape tinged with nostalgia and bittersweet memories. When we pulled into the driveway of the house, I hesitated for a moment before getting out. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, leaning against the car door. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "Nothing. Just, it feels strange to be here without him. Like the house is emptier than it should be." She nodded in understanding. "It'll take time, but we'll get through it. Together." That night, as I lay in the bed that had once been mine, I found myself unable to sleep. The room felt foreign and familiar all at once, a strange mix of who I had been and who I was now. The posters on the walls, the old trophies on the shelves, the worn books stacked in the corner. They all belonged to a version of me I had left behind. I sat up, the moonlight casting a silver glow across the room. My suitcase sat in the corner, and I found myself drawn to it. Kneeling down, I unzipped it and pulled out the photo album I had packed at the last minute. Flipping through the pages, I saw snapshots of my life. Mom and Dad smiling on a summer vacation, Sarah and me building sandcastles on the beach, Dad teaching me to ride a bike. The photos were a tapestry of love and laughter, but they also carried the weight of what I had hidden for so long. And then, tucked into the back, I found the photos I had added more recently. Photos of me as Evelyn, my first day at a new job, my first Pride parade, a candid shot of me laughing with friends. They felt like a different life entirely, but they were mine, just as much as the photos from my childhood were. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called, quickly closing the album. Sarah stepped inside, her face framed by the dim glow of the hallway light. She was holding 2 mugs of tea, steam curling into the air. "I thought you might be awake," she said, handing me one of the mugs before sitting on the edge of the bed. "Thanks," I said, cradling the warm mug in my hands. We sat in silence for a while, the quiet of the house wrapping around us like a blanket. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Do you think Dad really understood?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth steady me. "I think he tried. And that means more to me than anything." She nodded, her gaze distant. "I always worried he wouldn't. He could be so stubborn." I smiled faintly, the memory of his gruff demeanor tinged with affection. He was stubborn. But I think, deep down, he just wanted us to be happy, even if he didn't always know how to show it. Sarah turned to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm proud of you, you know. For coming back. For being who you are." I don't think I've ever said that, but I should have. Her words hit me like a wave, and I felt tears prick my own eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. She reached out and took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "We'll get through this, Evelyn. Together." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of arrangements, paperwork, and quiet moments of grief. Sarah and I spent hours sorting through Dad's belongings, each item a piece of his life that we had to decide the fate of. One afternoon, as we were going through an old chest in the attic, I came across a box labeled Thomas. I hesitated, my heart pounding as I opened it. Inside were fragments of my childhood, report cards, art projects, birthday cards, and photos. But what caught my eye was a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath the pile. I opened it carefully, the pages brittle with age. The handwriting was unmistakably Dad's, each word scrawled in his familiar, no-nonsense style. The entries were sparse, more like notes than full diary entries. But as I read, I realized they were about me, or rather, about his struggle to understand me. One entry, written years ago, caught my attention. "I don't know what's wrong with Thomas.
He's so quiet, so withdrawn.
I see him staring at himself in the mirror sometimes, like he's searching for something.
I wish he would talk to me.
I wish I knew how to help him." Another entry, more recent, was even more poignant. Sarah called today. She said Thomas is living as Evelyn now.
I don't know how to feel about it.
Part of me is angry, angry that he didn't tell me, that he didn't trust me. But another part of me, I just want my child to be happy. I don't understand it, but I want to. I want to try. Tears blurred the words, and I closed the journal, clutching it to my chest. Sarah looked over from where she was sorting through a pile of books. "What's that?" "Dad's journal," I said, my voice shaky.
He wrote about me.
About trying to understand. She came over, sitting beside me and resting a hand on my shoulder. "He loved you, Evelyn. In his own way, he always did." I nodded, the weight of the journal pressing against me like a lifeline to the father I had thought I'd lost. As the days turned into weeks, the house began to feel less like a place of sorrow and more like a place of healing. Sarah and I found comfort in each other, sharing stories and memories that brought Dad to life in ways I hadn't expected. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sarah turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "What's next for you, Evelyn?" she asked. I stared out at the horizon, the colors blending into a tapestry of possibility. "I don't know," I admitted. "But for the first time, I feel like I can move forward. Like I'm not running away anymore." She smiled, her eyes warm. "Whatever you do, just know I'm here for you. Always." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. As the sun set, casting the world in shades of gold and crimson, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. Coming home hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. It had given me closure, understanding, and the chance to reconnect with a father who, in the end, had loved me for who I truly was. And as I sat there, the future stretched out before me. I knew one thing for certain. I would carry his love with me, no matter where the road led. Thank you so much for watching till now. It means the world to have you here. This community is all about empowering each other and celebrating the incredible journeys of everyone on their path to living authentically. If you're ever feeling lost or alone, remember you have a whole family here for you. Hit that subscribe button. Smash that like button. And let's keep inspiring each other, sending you all the love and strength in the world. Until next time, live your life by your rules.